Support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Of the almost 50 separate programs we produce each year for television, this series of two programs, Part 1 and Part 2 of the Economic Review and the Economic Forecast, may be among my favorites. Happy holidays and welcome to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and Carolina public policy. I am Chris William, and on this edition, we will look back in part with our four resident economists on where we have been and to what effect here in our region. Please stay with us. The fun starts in just a moment.
Major funding also by NOVANT Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This is the Carolina Business Review Annual Economic Year in Review, featuring our panel of experts, Frank Hefner from the College of Charleston, Doug Woodward of the University of South Carolina, John Connaughton from UNC Charlotte, and Mike Walden of NC State University.
Sunglasses. Welcome to our program. Happy holidays, gentlemen. Good to have you all here. It's good to see you.
Thank you to be here.
Michael, welcome to the group. I know you've been on the show several times, but you haven't been in this dynamic yet.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Okay. Good. It'll be fun. Well, guys, let's take a look at 2016. You know, here it is, almost over. A lot of surprises, certainly from a public policy and a political standpoint. But what else kind of was surprising to you? What kind of came up? Cost of oil, interest rates, productivity, wage growth, or the lack of wage growth. John, start with you. What was the surprising part?
Well, not surprising so much as kind of a little shocking was the fact that the Fed raised interest rates last December and just sat on it for the next 6-8 meetings that they had during the year. They just simply didn't raise interest rates again. So, you know, last year at this time we had raised rates to the 25 to 50 basis point level, and we're still there entering into early December. The Fed is raising rates as we speak, and but it's just been surprising that they haven't provided themselves with some maneuvering room going forward this far into an expansion.
Doug, surprising?
I'll tell you what surprised me, and I should have put money on this, is that the stock market boomed after the election. I thought before the election, sell everything and then get back in afterwards, and I'm glad I didn't do that. But really, the stock market boom that happened, I thought we were already in a bubble. And look what happened after the election. Just didn't see that coming.
Michael, Frank?
Yeah, I think we had two economies in 16. We had the first 11 months where everyone thought Hillary Clinton would be elected president. We had interest rates not moving. We had inflation very, very low. And then we had the last month with the election of Donald Trump. Interest rates go up, expectations of inflation go up, much more bullish attitude about next year. So that surprised me because I'll speak for myself. I didn't expect the election outcome.
Yeah, Frank.
I think it's true for a lot of us, but I will say one thing that it seems like in the last couple of years, every time we meet, there's also a natural disaster that just took place in the Carolinas.
Please don't go dark on us.
I'm trying not to, but that's of course unpredictable. But what was surprising was how well the area responded and the results after that. I mean, the interest rate surprise, of course, who would have predicted that one? And of course, the election issues are big issues.
I'll just follow up on that. I have a little place on Hilton Head Island. It never really got hit since it's been built out by a hurricane. 100,000 trees down there.
Yes.
Following Hurricane Matthew.
Yes.
Let me go back to something you said, John. So did the Fed just completely miss this? Should they have raised rates, even looking back now, being an armchair general here to some degree?
Well, if you listen to what they've been saying during the year, they're moving away from using the interest rate tool, if you will, in the future, and they're looking at some different tools that they used in the Great Recession. That's quantitative easing and credit easing. So that's going to be one of their tools they're going to continue to use in the future. But another tool that they've started to run out there is this whole concept of interest on excess reserves. This gets really technical. Probably don't need to go into all kinds of detail there. But it's basically a way of encouraging or not encouraging banks to hold excess reserves in addition to what their required reserve ratio is by paying an interest rate on it. Right now they're limited to a 25 basis point premium over the federal funds rate, which is the rate that they set. What they're looking for in the future is to essentially lift that cap and allow them flexibility to change that rate to encourage banks to hold or not hold excess reserves.
And I think the Fed was surprised, and I think this may partly explain what they didn't do. They didn't raise interest rates. They've been surprised by the lackluster improvement in productivity, and that's translated until recently into very slow economic growth. And I think probably overhanging this is maybe their viewpoint that a lot of this is not controlled by public policy because it's demographically related. We're an aging society. Aging economies tend to grow at a slower pace.
So the interest rate conundrum, well, it's not a conundrum, it's just been low, is a lot of fun. When I had to give a talk to a group of retirees at a retirement home, explain to them, how are you going to survive on 1.5% interest rate and what's going to happen here? So, yeah, it's been double-edged in a sense. It hasn't, we think, provided the growth that it was supposed to have provided, but obviously the economy has been growing. And so we have the third quarter, 3.2% growth in GDP. But Mark Whitty, my macroeconomist, is saying that that's a blip and will probably revert back to mean for the fourth quarter.
Yeah. Just one more point about interest rates. I think what constrained the Federal Reserve this year, too, was that the rest of the world went the other direction. Europe was easing, Asia as well, and the dollar strengthening. So that really constrained them, and I think they otherwise would have done it.
Which is a good point, Doug. You know, people talk about us as being, of course, the world is flat, global economy, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But somebody made a pretty good argument on one of the talk shows recently about, yes, that's true, but the American central bankers should not be too concerned about what the other central bankers are doing, to the point where it keeps us from doing what we need to do in our front.
But it has to do with the dollar. Right. I mean, the dollar, look at the peso right now is plummeting and makes them more competitive, and I think they're really worried about that.
What happens, it's really a very simple process, but what happens is when our interest rates are high relative to others, it strengthens our dollar because cash flows into the United States,
right.
And that strengthened dollar makes it very difficult for us to sell. We've seen a rise of 20% in the strength of the dollar versus the euro in the past couple of years, plus 30% to the Canadian dollar, and plus 40% to the peso.
Yeah.
And those are our major trading partners, particularly as it relates to exports.
Yeah, we're an export-oriented state in South Carolina. Exports were down.
And North Carolina is both net exporters of goods and services, and this is a good place to bring up the point that if you put both Carolinas together, $780 billion or so GDP, if we could call it that, which means that's the 17th largest if we were a nation. 17th largest GDP on the globe. So how does this discussion about interest rates and the dollar, how does that factor into the global place that the Carolinas have?
Well, it makes it, I mean, it's going to make it harder for President-elect Trump and the new Trump administration to shrink the trade deficit. I mean, there are two ways to do that. You can reduce imports, which he's focused on, but you also can increase exports, and of course a stronger dollar is going to hurt that, and that translates into more difficulty for North and South Carolina businesses that are export-oriented. In the Triangle where I live, we have a lot of concern by some of the big companies about the trade because the stronger dollar is hurting their exports.
How does that?
The other issue on that, though, well, we keep forgetting this also, is that part of the imports, it's not just consumer goods that are being imported. There's a good chunk of the import trade that is used as an input to our manufacturing sector and our productions. So with a strong dollar, it's going to cost industry a lot more for those inputs. And so that has a negative effect on that. To some extent, with the dollar rise, we may not have to worry about having a trade war. We've effectively stopped trade just by the change in the value of the dollar.
You know, let me come back to this, because we can chase all the things down a rabbit hole, and I want to make sure we touch on a whole bunch of things. Doug, you said something, and Michael, you also had inferred this, and that's the whole idea of the surprise election of Donald Trump becoming president-elect, and also Brexit earlier in the year. Caught a lot of people by surprise. What do those two things say? do they say that we aren't that good at polling, or is there something else going on here?
Well, it says we're better economic forecasters than pollsters. I mean, the pollsters got it wrong.
And that's a change.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
But let's look at it. I mean, Hillary Clinton did win a significant increase in the voters than Trump did, and so they weren't completely wrong. They just didn't have it geographically specified enough, the pollsters, to see that coming.
To me, what it said was that as far as public policy, we have ignored some of the negative effects of globalization. And again, you don't have to look any further than North and South Carolina. Textile industry, furniture industry, et cetera, decimated in terms of jobs and production. And I'm certainly a free trader, but I'm a free trader who recognizes that when you change the rules of the game, as we did with NAFTA and GATT, you need to worry about somehow helping those who, for no reason of their own, are left out in the cold. And we have not done that with public policy.
I think the surprise, for example, we didn't even think of it as a major issue was Brexit, is because it became a non-issue real fast. In other words, the build-up to it was a huge amount of uncertainty. What is this going to do? And here we've had the vote, and we still don't know how it's going to play out, but it's no longer front-page news. So it just became a non-issue.
But with Brexit and what happened with the Trump election, we're in an era of economic nationalism now. And I think we're going to have to adjust to that. Everybody's looking inward. I think the era of expanding global trade treaties like NAFTA, WTO, that's over. You're not going to see it anymore. The big issue going forward is going to be more about automation than globalization in terms of what the economy does.
I think Mike hit on something when he talked about we're all free traders, but the problem is, if you think about it really simply, free trade is supposed to make the pie bigger, and implied in that is that everybody's slice gets bigger, and the problem is that everybody's slice doesn't get bigger. Right. Some people's slices get much bigger, some get much smaller in that process, and we have neglected that side of it. And when you take folks that are in their 40s and 50s and you put them out of work, that's something they've been doing for 15 to 20 years, this is not an easy, it's not that you can't retrain them, it's just simply the business is not receptive to entry-level folks in their 50s and 40s.
But this is a problem not just for trade, this is a problem for any kind of dislocation. It could be technological also.
Oh yeah.
And we've never really fully addressed any good labor policy in the country regardless on that issue, trade or technological changes.
Yeah, our solution is essentially a safety net versus some kind of meaningful option.
Some proactive plan.
And so what that results in is you've got, in North Carolina, I estimate, you've got 200,000 people who are of working age who have just dropped out of the labor force. They don't even want a job. They're not looking for jobs. These are not the official unemployed. These are the sort of the hidden
Is that
unemployed.
not an education issue?
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's a
combination.
training industry, but issue. But I mean, I'm 66 years old. I wouldn't want to go back to school and be retrained. I think there's an issue there related to people willingness to want to get retrained and how you do that. I think we've got to really think outside the box of how we reach these folks and reskill them.
Well, it allows us then to do the other hand. We've got low unemployment rates, but you brought up the discouraged workers.
Well, before we go down that, you said something exactly a year ago, right here, sitting in that chair on this program, and you said you thought we could play the clip, but we won't want to embarrass you in front of everyone. No, it actually was.
Play the clip, please.
It was a thoughtful. You said following No Child Left Behind Act and how we had summarily changed the DNA, how we were going to handle kids K through 12 or people K through 12. You said what that shows is, and these are my words, Frank, but it's a harbinger that folks. The one-size-fits-all government does not work anymore, and you expected to see more of that. Well, lo and behold, we've seen some real DNA change 2016.
Well, I think that statement explains the Trump phenomena, that so many people agree with one size does not fit all. And so the idea of centralization and dictates coming out of Washington, there's a larger rebellion against that than the pollsters anticipated.
And the rebellion's always been there. I mean, you can go back and speak politically a moment. Ross Perot, same sort of campaign as Trump. Pat Buchanan, and now Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was able to able to achieve a level of success with that campaign that those
I
two
just want to say,
gentlemen
you
did
could
not.
also see it in the local elections. You could see that building more and more people from the outsiders, non-politicians getting voted in. That's been a trend that's going on for a few
But it's
years
not
now.
just a U.S. phenomenon. I mean,
Right.
Trump didn't start this.
Right.
Trump is a result of what we're seeing is a pulling back from globalization across the globe, essentially, particularly of the developed countries, the G20 countries, where we're seeing a pullback. We're seeing less international trade today than we did, say, 2 years ago, and that's down. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's hard to say at this point in time. But
It's good we
are
have a
seeing
big
retrenchment.
domestic market.
Say that again.
It's good that we have a big domestic
Yes.
market. And I think
Yeah.
what people want to do is take advantage of that.
You know, was productivity this past year, was it disappointing, or did you expect it to be as soft as it has been?
It's
Yes,
disappointing, and it's going to continue to be disappointing, apparently.
I call this the 2% problem. And if you look at the GDP growth for the past 7 years coming out of this recession, it's been right around 2%. And when you look at look, real simple for everybody, there are only two sources of economic growth: labor force growth and productivity growth. You add them together, that's potential GDP growth. We've been sitting for the last half a decade with 0.2% on average annual labor force growth and about 0.75% on average productivity growth. That means that potential GDP is going to rise by about 1%. So we've been closing the gap with this 2% rate. It's like it's like Ghostbusters. Don't cross the streams. Pretty soon we're going to cross the streams, and this 2% growth is going to turn into something less. And the fundamental issue is that nothing's going to change about labor force growth. We're going to have anemic labor force growth for the next several decades. So we've really got to look to things that are going to generate productivity growth.
Save that for part 2 next week, because I want you to look forward and say that. Can you remember that exactly like that,
Not
John?
possible.
Yeah, I think there was a chance of that. What about interest rates? Were you surprised at rates? Not just what the Fed did, but the natural push on longer rates?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think this is tied to the fact that I actually expected growth to be a little better. I mean, not 4%.
State growth or
well,
national?
national growth too. I thought it was going to do a little better. So I've been flummoxed by the slow growth rate, and that's, I think, translated in part to low interest rates.
But they're rising.
December
But they're rising
15th.
now, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm just saying, but the long rates are rising now, and that's what I would expect. So I wasn't that surprised.
You said again. Let's do this. Go back to saying that you said. He said.
Okay.
You said that you would be that if business in the state of South Carolina did not respond, business would not do meaningful capital improvement. And,
That's right.
And these are my terms. Play the game if those that make policy were not more aggressive about investing and reinvesting in infrastructure and making that a little bit more of a priority.
I stand by that statement. Yeah. So we didn't see a major infrastructure bill in South Carolina, and it's something businesses have been asking for and really need to expand. They're not investing. Our capital investment across the country is one thing holding back our productivity growth, and the public sector has to be a part of that. They really need to participate with the private sector in creating the conditions for capital investment and growth.
So as economists, how would you tell those that make policy in the General Assembly and the State House, how would you tell them to find the money when they're trying to balance safety nets, education costs, and everything else when there is a hue and a cry for reducing taxes?
Well, we did have an infrastructure package passed North Carolina, so we did go that route.
But it was small.
It was relatively small. Yeah. I think that's one. Interestingly, during the campaign, Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump both agreed infrastructure needed to be addressed.
Now they're going to have to figure out how to do it.
Now they're going to have to figure out how to do it, do it more rapidly too. I mean, that's one of the issues too. Not just paying for it, but actually getting results that come faster than 12 years down the road.
In South Carolina, we just can't keep kicking it down the can and saying, well, we've got the money, but we're not using it correctly. We need leaner, more efficient Department of Transportation, which may be true still, but we also need more money. And the idea of raising a gasoline tax obviously has not passed, and apparently it's not going to pass.
Well, now our governor, though, who resisted that, is moving on, so we'll see.
But the replacement may not necessarily be also.
It's not just South Carolina that's not willing to raise this is almost like we talk about the third rail of federal politics being essentially the Social Security. The third rail of local politics is a gasoline tax.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've seen one state, I think New Jersey, has recently had a significant increase in the gasoline tax. but it hasn't changed. Cars get better miles per gallon, so they use the road more, but they don't pay any more.
And then there's even pushback on privatizing transportation, I-77. Some say that Governor McCrory lost the election not due to HB2, but it was due to Mecklenburg County. And I think he went from 49% of the vote in 12 to 34% this year.
And that'd be 10,000 votes.
And that would be 10,000 votes, and it was due to concern over I-77.
So when does it become politically punitive for those in charge in South Carolina, as you all just articulated in North Carolina? Doug, when does it become a real bugaboo for politicians who arenn't doing something about infrastructure?
You know, they always respond to a crisis. There's no crisis there. It's just it's a slow burn. You know, it hurts businesses, but not on a daily basis. And so, I don't know that will happen. It would have to be really something that would wake them up and say we have to do this.
A bridge collapse.
A bridge collapse, maybe.
Yeah. And so, which we've had in this country,
right?
With loss of life.
With loss of life,
yeah.
and we've had no particular. There's for the next 2 or 3 months, there's a lot of talk about it, and then under the radar. I mean, the problem we have here is that we have neglected our infrastructure, not for the past 10 years, but for the past 30 years. And it has a life. And we've been unwilling to tax ourselves specifically for infrastructure. One of the beauties of the gasoline tax is it's a benefits received tax. We all learned that in our principles of economic class, I want to say how many years ago. And only those people who use the facilities are in fact paying for it. But we've been unwilling to deal with that.
But tell that to the Truckers Association.
Yeah, and when you talk to people in social settings, non-economists, and say, I expound on that, they say, oh, well, there's a lot of waste in government. They can get the money somewhere else. That's the common attitude.
Yeah.
But when everyone when the neighborhood in all 50 states is the same, John, how is South Carolina, North Carolina, how are they going to feel compelled to be better at it if all the states around them have the same problem?
Oh, exactly.
Well, I've driven up 95 recently, and some states are better at it than other states. I've noticed as you go up 95. There are, some states have better infrastructure than South Carolina does. When you cross the border, you can actually see the difference in road quality. It's amazing.
But I've seen worse too out on the West Coast. It's unbelievable with all the wealth creation in the Bay Area. The infrastructure is the worst in the country.
Let's. We got a few minutes left, and I want to. We've been talking around the governors of North and South Carolina and compare and contrast. This is interesting because when Pat McCrory started his job as governor, there was a lot of promise. Republicans were in power. Somebody once said, there were Republicans as far as the eye can see in North Carolina. In South Carolina, Nikki Haley was a little bit back on her heels because they thought she was going to be a lot like Sanford, or at least like a Tea Party. And the fortunes of these two governors now are completely different, 180 degrees.
Although they both may end up in the Trump administration.
And that
Nikki Haley
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a thing.
It's a thing.
It's a thing.
Yeah. Well, one is. We know Haley is. Yeah.
Well, with Governor Haley, I think after the Charleston massacre, she showed herself to be very diplomatic, and I think that really helped elevate her in the national.
And the flag, dealing with the flag.
And dealing with well, that was related to that, dealing with the flag, and I think it really showed her to be a good.
She got a lot of good press in North Carolina over that.
And also good picks like Bobby Hitt at Commerce and others who were good gatekeepers for her, I'm assuming.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, it showed that to be a governor, you actually have to govern. And she showed what good governance could look like, I think.
And then HB2 and roads issues in North Carolina, was that the unwinding?
Well,
of
I think
Pat McCrory?
HB2 was a total miscalculation on the part of the powers in the General Assembly. I think many there viewed the original bill just shoot down what Charlotte passed. They added on to it because they had a social agenda. And I think that was they totally miscalculated the reaction. And I think McCrory was the focus for the pushback, especially when NCAA tournaments started getting canceled.
Ended up being the poster boy for it when the General Assembly had just as much, and the city of Charlotte had just as much responsibility in this.
That's true, but I again, that may have cost him some votes, Mike. But I think at the end of the day, it was the toll road in northern Mecklenburg County and the population there simply running away. That was again a miscalculation on his part in terms of the fervor of why are we paying for a road when everybody else is getting their roads for free.
Healthcare, surprising at all? We got about 60 seconds left. Surprising about healthcare and where it is right now?
I mean, the costs keep going up. That's not surprising.
Yeah, okay.
That's not surprising.
Did the increase this year surprise you on healthcare?
Nope, not at all.
Not at all.
I think we discussed it last year.
That's like almost perfectly predictable.
Yeah.
I mean, they talk about the fact that one of the things that Obamacare has versus what the Republicans are suggesting is a mandate, but it really does not have a mandate, and that's the death spiral.
Hold on to that, because guess what? You're going to be back next week, and we're going to talk about where we're heading now. And I will have some quotes about what you all said last year. There's a surprise. Gentlemen, thank you for being on this program. This is a lot of fun. Call me a geek, but it's a lot of fun to have you here. We'll look ahead next week. Happy holidays, happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah.
Same to you.
Good to see
Thanks.
Good to see you.
Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, comments, questions for our guests, go to carolinabusinessreview.org. and watch a show or make a comment. Until next week, I'm Chris Woody, and we hope your season is truly merry and bright. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. NOVANT Health. Bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco. A global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.